Hello, my name's Marlene Westerveld, and with me today is Mary Clayson. We're delighted to talk about the Global Tales project. More specifically, we're going to talk about developing and piloting the Global Tales protocol for eliciting children's personal narratives around the world. So let's briefly talk about our overall aim. In this study, and with we, I mean the Child Language Committee of the International Association of Communication Sciences and Disorders, also known as IALP, wanted to investigate methods for eliciting and analyzing children's personal event narratives. Our ultimate aim was really to develop a tool and approaches to support interventions for this important skill in children with significant challenges in their learning, including those with language disorders. So we wanted to develop a protocol that would be useful for clinicians around the world. And thus the Global Tales project was born. And TALES stands for Talking About Lived Experiences in Stories. So why personal narratives? As you'll be aware, personal narratives are descriptions of past events that are experienced by the speaker. These personal event narratives develop from a very early age. Children as young as 2.5 or 3 years of age may be able to put together a couple of sentences talking about things they've recently experienced, usually scaffolded by their parents or caregivers. What you may not realize is that the majority of conversations of children ages 5 to 11 years involve personal narratives. Personal narratives are important for classroom participation and for accessing the curriculum. For example, when talking about the exciting things you did in the weekend, or when being asked to write journal entries, for example. Competence in personal event narratives is critical for social emotional well-being and identity development. So why is that? There's this critical relationship. Sharing stories builds friendships and helps develop a sense of identity and community. So when developing a global protocol, we had to consider some of the cultural influences or potential cultural influences on children's ability to produce personal event narratives. So what we know is that personal narratives reflect the cultural style of someone's community. In other words, your personal narratives will reflect the way you've been exposed or how you've been exposed to personal event narratives yourself. We also know that the quality of reminiscing experiences, so that's sharing your personal, past personal events with other people, for example, caregivers or parents, during childhood is significantly related to the development of personal narratives. So we know that in some cultures, oral storytelling is much more prominent than in other cultures. We also know that there are differences in personal narrative structure between cultures, from topic-centered to topic-associated. So for example, in some cultures, if we ask children to talk about an experience of going to the dentist, they may talk about their own personal experience of that one particular standout experience of going to the dentist. Whereas in other cultures, children may talk about all these different experiences of going to the dentist or different family members going to the dentist. Now, none of these are better or worse. They may simply reflect the kind of narratives you've been exposed to. In some cultures, conciseness is valued. So the shorter and more succinct the narrative, the better. In others, we might expect more elaborate narratives with much more detail. Now, for an excellent overview of cultural influences on personal narrative development and production skills, we refer you to Bliss and McCabe in 2008. So when we thought about creating a standard protocol for children around the world, we had to consider the following aspects. So what we did is we used verbal prompts. and no pictures, because pictures themselves might be biased to some cultures more than others. We asked children to tell a story without giving them a model story that might resemble the stories from some cultures, but not others. We tried to come up with topics that might appeal and at least be recognizable to children across the globe. So what we did is we focused on feelings, mental states, and emotions, and I'll run you through the topics in just a minute. We wanted people to use very neutral subprompts. For example, tell me more, oh yeah, that's right, tell me more. We decided in the end to just provide the children with 6 different topics to hopefully ensure that there would be at least a couple of topics that would be of interest to the children. And then we came up with a standard protocol that was then translated into different languages. So on this slide, you see the prompts that we've used. So these are the English prompts, obviously. So the first one was tell me a story about a time when you felt excited or really happy. The second one, about a time when you felt worried or confused. The third one, a story about a time when you were really annoyed or angry. Number 4, about a time when you felt proud of yourself. Number 5 was around a problem and that you had to fix. So tell me all about what happened and what you had to do to fix it. And number 6 was tell me a story about something that has happened to you that was very important to you. Now, what we've done is we have uploaded a demonstration video. And if you're interested in watching this video, I've put the link on this slide. You can also access the protocol free of charge, of course, on the Open Science Framework, and the link is on this slide as well. So that brings us to the pilot project, which is what we're going to be talking to you about today. So in part 1, what we wanted to do is we really wanted to investigate children's performance on the protocol across languages and cultures on measures of verbal productivity, syntactic complexity, and semantic diversity. And Mary will discuss some of our findings with you in just a moment. But I also really encourage you to see the presentation by Sarah Furman that is part of this symposium, in which she compares Israeli-speaking children to children who grew up in New Zealand, just to look at some of the complexities of doing this project. Then our second aim was to investigate the topics or themes of the children's responses across nations and cultures. And this is covered in the presentation by Kai-Mei Chen and Carol Westby. So that's symposium number 4. And then the second part of our pilot project was to obtain feedback from all the researchers who were involved in this project regarding the process of adapting the protocol for use in their own country. And Rena Lyons has kindly summarized this part of the project in the second part of this symposium. So I'm now going to hand over to Mary Clayson to run you through some of the results of our pilot project.
Thanks, Marlene. So first up, a reminder of the data that we're reporting in this part of the presentation. And so we have data collected from New Zealand, Australia, Cyprus, Israel, Greece, Russia, the USA, Taiwan, Brazil, and Croatia, as you can see on the map. We're also in the process of collecting data in Ireland, Iceland, Canada, Sweden, South Africa, and Poland, which is a pretty exciting and unique prospect. So the participants that we're reporting data on in this presentation, so you can see the range of countries again in the graph there. So in each country we had 20 10-year-old children. There were an equal number of males and females. They came from middle or mid-SES, mid-socioeconomic status families. The native language, the language that we collected the data in, was the main language spoken by the children. The children were reported by their parents to be typically developing. In other words, they were attending a mainstream school, didn't have a history of seeing a speech pathologist, and were not obtaining any extra help in any of the curriculum areas at school. And all of our samples were, of course, collected and transcribed by a native speaker, and the transcripts were then analysed on measures of total number of utterances, MLU in words, and number of different words. And all transcripts were checked for accuracy by another member of the research team. And as we begin to share our results, I just want to mention that due to the complexities around comparing so many different languages, which all have different grammatical structures, it's not possible to present the data analysed statistically. So we've chosen to share our raw data with you. And as you can see on this graph, we have the measure on the vertical axis, and across the horizontal axis, you can see each country. So the first thing we did was we considered length of transcript, measured in communication units, across complete and intelligible utterances. And this demonstrated that the task was successful in eliciting samples from 10-year-old children in each of the languages sampled. As you can see, the standard deviations for each country were relatively large. However, this finding is similar to the findings in other studies using other genres, such as narratives, recounts, etc., and also with other aged participants. So we weren't overly surprised at this diversity. It is interesting to look at the samples from Brazil. That's the third one along, and they look a little bit different to the other samples, and we're certainly going to be exploring that further as we dig a little deeper into our data. If we look now at mean length of utterance, you can see that the findings for mean length of utterance in words are seen here. Here it's interesting to note the smaller range in all countries, again with the exception of Brazil, where there was a much bigger range in MLU. And now when we look at semantic diversity, measured by number of different words, we can again see a similar pattern. So, what's next? In the rest of the symposium, other members of our team will be sharing more information with you. As Marlene said, there's going to be some feedback from our international collaborators on the usefulness of the protocol with 10-year-old children. We'll also share some of our first steps in investigating linguistic differences between language. For example, considering how morphemes are marked in different languages and the impact of this on measures such as number of different words. We'll also share some of our work in exploring cultural influences on the personal narratives children provide in response to the prompts. And the next stage of our project, we're going to be investigating the sensitivity of the protocol, looking at a broader range of ages. So we started with 10-year-olds. We're looking at collecting data from children of varying ages. We also want to consider the impact of language abilities on performance on this task, as well as different diagnoses such as ASD. So we're very busy collecting data on all of those things at the minute. Another area that we want to also investigate is whether the protocol has the potential to be used as a screening tool, because we all know that it's important that when we're screening children for language disorder, that it's important that we collect data from both word and sentence level, as well as at a discourse level. And perhaps this tool has the potential for use as part of a screening package. So in summary, our Global Tales Personal Narrative Protocol was successful in eliciting discourse samples in 10-year-old children from a range of different countries and in a range of different languages. Importantly, the protocol has the potential to fill a considerable gap in our clinical work, where clinicians find themselves working with clients from a range of cultural and linguistic backgrounds. Wouldn't it be amazing if we knew we had a tool in our toolbox that meant we could collect a representative sample of the child's performance on a personal narrative in their home language or their first language? At this stage, I'd really like to acknowledge the present and past members of the IELP Child Language Committee, and we have their names listed here. We also have a project team that's just associated with this project. And so some other people that are part of our Global Tales project are also listed on the slide here. We'd like to acknowledge the work of all of these people in collecting this data. If you're interested in more information, you can have a look at our Open Science page for a copy of the slides. And if you're interested in joining our Global Tales project and perhaps adding to the range of countries and languages that we have data from, please be in touch with Marlene and I. We'd love to hear from you. We'd really like to have a few more flags on that map of the world. Thank you.
Thank you.